Well, hey, Aaron, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast today to have a conversation. I know our mutual friend, John Paul, kind of forced this on you. So I appreciate you, anyway, doing it and providing an interview with us. I know, as I was telling you earlier, you and I haven't had a lot of organic conversations. So I'm really excited about today. So thanks for coming on.
Yeah, no, it's great. You've had some really distinguished guests. I applaud you for doing this type of thing. I think that's something I've been proud of in our field and profession. Is just the network and connections that we all have, and kind of the legacy of what we do and who we know. So I'm proud to be part of your podcast and capture some of those stories. So thanks for doing this, Mickey.
Yeah. It's, it during the pandemic, whenever we didn't get to see each other too much, as a group, it was like really important to me to have those times, whether it was conferences or just local meetings or whatever. And so being able to see people and talk to people was important. And when that got taken away from us, it was like, oh no, like this is a really important part of our profession, is being able to get together and to know each other and to communicate about the things that we're working on and that sort of thing. And then, I started realizing that also we, from working in Scandinavia, we also have our little groups, and sometimes we don't get spread out and get to meet the people in those groups. So this podcast really gives a medium for introducing people to biometricians such as yourself who they wouldn't otherwise know. Although everybody knows who you are and what you do, they might not have a personal relationship with you. So
Yeah, no, I think that's what makes our profession pretty colorful. I mean, yeah, if you just read the papers or read the books, then you don't get to know the characters and the people. And yeah, I feel very fortunate in my career that I've been able to engage and interact with a lot of the kind of the older generation folks like John Paul, but even a generation like George Furnival himself. So yeah, I feel I got lucky. So I spanned several generations, which it's nice when you know the people and you've been able to interact with them directly rather than just read their papers or know the name.
right, and I feel today I I got put in my place at the SOMENS meeting last year, that I am not a part of the younger generation anymore. But being in my generation is interesting because you're 10 years ahead of me, and you got to meet quite a few people that I never got to meet that are still kind of like legends, and like burnable. So it's a really interesting period that we have here too, where we have a lot of new people coming into the field, and it probably always happens that way, but I feel like now we have a lot of new people coming in, and they're not knowing others. So for them to be able to have this and to be able to understand more about you and John Paul and everybody, I think it's really important, and I'm really happy that I can do it. I don't think that I was the best person to do this, but at least I wanted it to happen, so it's happening, and so I'm happy that I can be a part of it. And I'm happy that people like you will come and be a part of it as well. And when I reached out to John Paul, it was, as you mentioned, you're not a retired biometrician. I reached out to John Paul to look for more retired biometricians because, much like John Paul, they like to go and retire and not communicate with anybody. They just doing their own thing there. And I was trying to see if he had anybody, in his back pocket that might want to come on. And now he's connected me with you, and I'm sure you're going to be able to help me pull in a few others as well.
Yeah, no, yeah, I think there's a lot of people that are kind of spanning out. I think that's we're seeing it here locally, just in terms of a lot of these people are hitting the 30, 35 year marks and are going off to greener pastures. So
Yeah.
so yeah, the people I suggested are great individuals, and I think it's trying to capture that knowledge. So
Yeah.
no, I know it's not an easy role. It takes your own personal time to get these set up and go through them, but it just takes one person doing this, and then it kind of catches on. So I really applaud you and happy to be part of this.
Thanks. I'm fortunate enough to have the support here at my company, Larson McGowan, that they don't mind me taking a little bit of time to do this, and they recognize it's important. And it's one of the ways for me just to provide service to our community that might not I might not otherwise be able to give my time and this I can. So
I think it's huge. It's so much of this stuff happens and it falls through the cracks because it's not anybody's real responsibility. You know, that's kind of how I feel about these larger organizations like NEMO or SOMENS, these regional groups that have had a long history, but as we were talking about before, COVID, changing personnel, just the general norms of how you host meetings. It's hard to get people to leave home when you can do so much virtually these days.
yeah, and you have a lot of meetings under your belt in terms of organization, and now this year you're organizing the Joint NEMO SOMENS meeting. Do you feel it's been different this year compared to past years that you've hosted?
Yeah, it takes a lot more thought and effort. I think you got to really think about the location. You want to make it easy for people to get to. I think you want to make it a desirable location, so that people maybe will make it a family trip or at least bring a partner. So location is key. You got to make it affordable, and you got to make it worth people's time. So it's really hard. I mean, I think there was this post-COVID bubble where people were just happy to get out of their house and go to new places, but I think we're well beyond that now. And so thinking about the event itself, so I'm excited. We're kind of rehosting it back at the Von Trapp. So a nice thing about being around for a while is and with changing folks is that you can kind of recycle a little bit. So this is our second go around of having NEMO and SOMENS at it was a joint meeting. So this is our second go around of doing this at the Von Trapp, which has a nice, interesting history of being in beautiful Vermont, but also having a forestry connection as well. So I'm excited for people to get to experience it. It's a pretty special place. But I mean, meeting organization is I sweat it. It all comes down to what you're serving for dinner, to how you organize the agenda, and what people you get to show up. It's a lot like wedding planning, and it's all in the details. So and like you said, it's important that we do. I think it's important. It's how early career people can network. I think it's important for people to get a pulse on what's happening across the region. And I think it's also important just to kind of talk about what's state of the art. And I think what I've always enjoyed about these menstruationist meetings are having the interaction between the applied people and the academics. I think that's it's a large reason why I'm here in Maine is I can work directly with landowners, and I'm not in some ivory tower that I'm not fully engaged with the people that are trying to use this information. So I appreciate that, and I want to keep that kind of perspective in our menstruationist meeting. But of course, I mean that's an intimidation factor, right? Those people don't tend to present to academic crowds, and they often don't start with research objectives or hypotheses. So trying to create some space for people that got real world issues and maybe have some solutions or an idea. I think trying to foster that and encourage that within these menstruationist groups are really what's going to help kind of keep them relevant and keep people engaged and at the table.
It's really interesting. We finally started doing these joint SOMENS NEMO meetings, and they've just become kind of huge compared to how when we were doing just the solo meetings, how they used to be. I was talking to a friend, my master's advisor, Dean Colwell, a few weeks ago, and I'm organizing the meeting for our Virginia Tech Forest Modeling Cooperative annual meeting this year. So we're going to have it here in Mobile. And I was telling him my plan of what I'm doing. We're going to do a day of presenting on applied work that we're doing using the co-op data and models. And he said, well, that sounds like what the SOMENS meeting used to be. And I was just thinking of how it has evolved, even in my time. You know, I think the first meeting I went to was in 2009. We had it in a small conference room in a Hilton Garden Inn or something, and there were, 20 people in the room, and I was one of 3 students. And to go to what it is, like last year's meeting where we have 2 concurrent sessions going on for 2 days, we've got like 40, 50 grad students there. Like, it's just so amazing to see how big it has become. But at the same time, do you lose a little bit of something when it gets so big? You lose a little bit of that kind of like personal feeling.
I agree, and that's the debate that we wrestle with. I'll say that it's just as hard to organize an event for 10 people as it is as 100. So if I'm going to make the investment of my time to try to organize something, I think more the merrier is my philosophy. It's really about all these. I mean, most people are concerned about the agenda and who's talking, but as you know, most of these meetings are about what happens after the presentations or between the presentations. So I think fostering those organic kind of interactions and getting people to engage kind of outside the meeting room, that's what I think about much more than should it be 10 or 12-minute talks. But I agree, there's trade-offs. But I think it's also the culture, right? If you can set the tone of the meeting that this is informal, everyone's a human, they're approachable, it's to generate dialogue. I think then people feel the comfort, whether it's 10 or 100 people, that's the norms of how these meetings are run. And I think, yeah, even though last year's meeting was on the larger end, I think it still had the feel of a mensurationist meeting, and good things happen. And to me, it's about, I think one of our things that mensurationists, biometricians don't do is celebrate our successes very well. I think it's easy to publish equations and develop growth models that get widely used, but we don't talk about the people who made them or the challenges that were faced trying to go from point A to point B. So I think it's important that we keep that culture, as you were talking about, these small informal groups, and I think we can do that. I think there's things like the Stroop Challenge or Lifetime Achievement Awards, the post dinner hospitality suite. I mean, these are really where the rich conversations happen. I think maintaining some of these traditions, and I also think, to me, we live in a global world, and it was nice when we had distinct regions and we had enough people that felt the need to go to a mensurationist meeting. But now, I mean, particularly with the Northeastern mensurationist group, I mean, it would be a struggle to probably get 10, 15 folks together. And to me, it's better to combine efforts and not people's travel budgets, people's time are limited. So if we're going to organize a meeting, then let's do it together and have this kind of cross-regional pollination that I think is important to our profession. And the networking that happens. I feel bad sending students to an event that they're not going to be able to meet new people or engage with people outside of kind of their little bubble.
And we're all working on the same kind of problems. We might have, species difference here or there, but we're all working on the same kind of problems, and we have a lot to learn from each other. And
I agree.
I do see why having joint meetings, can be super beneficial for people. I mean, especially with the hot topics of the day, LiDAR or whatever, like we're all doing it. It's nice to go and see how other people are doing it in other parts of the world. For example, where you're at, I mean, working with a lot of, for example, hardwood species that in my part of the world, we're mostly focused on not just pine, loblolly pine, But now with the developments in carbon markets and such, now everybody's interested in the hardwoods. So, and we haven't been touching those for 30 years. So now we have a lot to learn from what you've all been doing up in the Northeast. So it's really interesting.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's one of my frustrations as I've been around for a decade or two in this business. I think our regional nature often disservices the larger profession because I think you got one region talking about southern pine beetle, and up here we're talking about spruce budworm. Ultimately, we're talking about forest health. But that message gets diluted really quickly as we start trying to champion our own kind of challenges. So that's a big thing that I've been trying to do is better unite the sector to address these kind of cross-regional issues. I mean, it's I think we're all competing against each other, so we're more effective doing that together jointly than trying to compete southern pine with white pine or this or that. So that's something I'm really passionate about. I've worked hard to kind of dissolve those boundaries. I agree it's much easier when you get remote sensing technologies like LiDAR or forest health concerns, climate change to some degree, carbon. These are unifying issues, and I think they go right back to the forest. And that's what we need to do a better job of, is telling the larger story, not just kind of our regional challenges or opportunities. So yeah, I to me personally, there's some loss of that regional nature when you start combining things or blending regions. But I think also you get people on the same page, and you learn that yeah, it might be a loblolly pine or it might be a white pine, but they're both trees. And studying that general phenomenon, I think there's greater room through collaboration than trying to do this separately. And I think that's kind of what I've seen, particularly as you mentioned with these cooperatives. I mean, there's at least 7, 8, 9 cooperatives, but fundamentally, I think we're all working on the same thing, and we all have a fairly shared membership as well. So I think finding ways to leverage the strengths of all these different cooperatives and work jointly on things, I think that's where the advances and the breakthroughs happen. It's through those collaborations, and those really are what I'm focused on, because they take someone just like you organizing these podcasts. It just takes someone reminding people of that bigger picture, but also helping facilitate the conversations and discussions that often need to happen. So I'm excited. I think I also feel like there's a window there, right? So carbon markets are happening. We've got some larger companies that are now starting to explore them and actually make uh, make sales. So, but I think largely the carbon offset market's been driven by non-forest sector parties, and so you end up with crazy protocols. You end up with developers hawking certain stuff, and it's ultimately, I mean, it's really just repackaging of a lot of the prior work that we've already done, right? It's not that big of a stretch to go from a volume-based growth and yield system to a carbon-based growth system. And so I think by us kind of regionalizing and compartmentalizing stuff, I think people often fill the void, and those are often the non-experts, and that's part of my frustration is we have a lot of advances, and we just don't tell our successes or promote what we've done or our history very well. So again, it's part of capturing the people, but also thinking about the bigger picture.
Yeah, I think, well, don't want to get too deep into the carbon markets, but it seems to be a huge part of many people's day to day, especially in modeling and sampling. But it's interesting to me, reading through some of these protocols and, you know, knowing that this wasn't written by a person that really understands forest sampling or forest modeling. And you're going like, why have we not been included? And maybe because we haven't interjected ourselves into that.
And I think we've also tried to, at some cases, tried to ignore it and focus on traditional forest uses and not embrace these new markets. Yeah, I think yeah, carbon has its issues, but I think it's the tip of the iceberg. And we're going to have biodiversity markets. We're going to have fresh air, fresh water markets. We're going to have habitat markets. So to me, I think the sector should be forward thinking, and this is something we should celebrate. I mean, we're a carbon positive sector, and there's interest in both green products and decarbonization. So what better win for the sector to embrace these new opportunities? But what I've seen is that we're often lagging behind a lot of the other sectors and are often resistant to the changes that probably are logical. And I totally understand the resistance because you don't want to displace traditional markets, but at the same time, I view these new markets as additive and supplementary. And so, and especially when you get a low margin business, those benefits that you can get from these secondary markets are pretty huge, I think.
Yeah, I think, people are pretty resistant to change, and this becomes a huge change for them. I mean, here in the South, if you're used to planting loblolly pine at 605 trees per acre and thinning it twice and clear cutting it at age 30, and you don't want to deviate from that, now extending rotations becomes like a really big thing to do. And so it's not just like cross the T's and dot the I's. It's like a whole rigmarole of we got to make sure this works before we even commit the tiniest bit. And so it's been, and then because of the way that some of these protocols are written, it's been hard to get people to get on board with it, I think, because they're going, well, that's not what we do. So it'll be interesting though to see where it goes. And I like what you say. I mean, it is additive. And it should be positive. And at this point, trying to deny that it is here is not the right approach.
Yeah, I agree. And it takes the big players kind of making that first step. And I think that that's happening. And now the markets will probably respond accordingly. My hope is that just similar to forest certification, I mean, you kind of had third party vendors that kind of established that. And then you had the sector develop its own standards. So my hope is that we can kind of do the same thing with carbon and these other ecosystem services that because a lot of what's happening doesn't make sense biologically or even financially. So I think if we can address those market issues and develop something that works, then you'll see the wider adoption. So, and I think if you can do it in a climate smart, climate sensitive, or carbon sensitive manner, um, then that supports the broader business model that many of these companies are now operating under. So again, it's telling our story and thinking bigger than what we have historically done. So that's at least where my mind is. I think fiber production is always going to be there. That's always going to be a primary use of forest. But I think this is one of the rare opportunities that we can have the ecological benefits of well-managed forest also to highlight it. And I think that's been our biggest issue is not necessarily the biology or how to grow trees. It's more doing it within a socially informed manner.
Yeah. And it's interesting to go from that to like the purely fiber production approach to adding other, forest positive things like, this, but it's crazy to me again, and I'm reiterating a thing I just said, that it's taken so long to get people on board because it's just not what I don't. And there's probably a lot of reasons why that is, but still, kind of the push against it is weird to me. It's like we're not necessarily embracing it the way that I thought we would have in the past. But again, also it's different and change is hard. So. But I am looking forward to the future. As you said, some of the big players in the game are getting on board. They're having entire departments dedicated to carbon. And so it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the next 5 years. I think it's going to be completely different than the past 5.
I agree. Yeah, it's good to see people embracing it. Yeah, I've often wondered what makes our sector kind of lag. I think it's just our mindsets. are long term. I mean, it takes, even in the best of years, 6 years for a eucalyptus maybe to reach merchantable size. It maybe takes loblolly pine 15 years. It takes a white pine here 60 years. Probably takes a spruce 100 years. So those are long temporal time horizons, and as foresters, we have to think in those time horizons. But markets move. Obviously, the Dow moves on a nanosecond basis. So, kind of marrying those two different timelines, I think, is critical.
Yeah.
And maybe this is one of the benefits of social media is fostering change faster. Um, and I think it's a whole mindset issue too that our profession needs to embrace, and I don't know how you culture that except for talking about markets and uncertainty, climate change, and all the kind of the drivers of that change.
Well, and a little bit of a segue, but in terms of definitely changes to industry and how we approach things, I think advances in technology, LiDAR, drones, all of this is completely going to change how we do forest sampling. And I know you've got like 20 papers or something on the topic, but it also seems like there's some pushback to start incorporating this, and at least into the industrial world. I remember the last year's SOMENS meeting, Greg Johnson gave a presentation on LiDAR and its uses, but still at that point, you hear that presentation from somebody who led the biometrics trials are going like, this isn't getting us what we want, And so it's integrating that into our business practices is also taking longer than I thought it would. Because even when I started, 15 years ago, people were talking about LiDAR then. And so, and at that point, they're saying in the next 5 years, this is going to completely change sampling. And you know what? We still put boots on the ground every day.
It's hard. Yeah, it takes time. And I think often, I think when you get a flashy new technology, people want to race to it and embrace it wholeheartedly. And I think that's what happened with LiDAR is people kind of fell for that narrative that this will replace ground-based sampling and you can do so much more. It kind of didn't quite pan out. And then there's this time period that you need people to forget that bad experience and re-embrace things. So I think it's this push-pull dynamic that's hard. I think you gotta kind of let these things kind of happen organically and try to provide the infrastructure and the support to make these transitions. I think what I've seen is it's mostly abrupt. We need a new inventory, so we're going to do an enhanced forest inventory. Oh no, it didn't quite pan out like we wanted to, so now we're going to go back to a ground-based, and then the people don't come back and revisit that as the technologies have evolved and improved. So I think again these menstruation meetings are a chance to have open dialogues. I think that's important. I think it's I'm seeing this now with AI, right? There's new AI startups that are doing carbon or AI to map every single tree. It all sounds great, but and you can easily get kind of sold on the larger sales pitch. But I think taking a step back and what issues is this actually addressing, and what advances compared to traditional ground-based methods does this actually solve? So yeah, it's a tough thing. Technology is always going to evolve. There's always going to be people kind of hawking their wares, but I think we got to kind of look under the curtain a little more and see what it actually gains and how it actually works. And I didn't see that happening too much in the early days of LiDAR, but I think now people have embraced this technology, and I actually would say it's maturing a little bit, and so people are thinking about the next frontier, which is exciting. And that's the big reason why I'm in kind of applied R&D. Is it's fun to reinvent and explore new ideas. So yeah, I'm not a remote sensing person, but I have basic inventory biometric skills that that allows us to embrace this technology and use it to address specific issues of what's needed. So hopefully we can continue to do that. I would like to accelerate the timeline. That's where these new technologies might help. It takes a long time to start an experiment, wait 20, 30 years to see the results. So now if we can do that in new ways and better ways, then I think that just helps everyone. But it also takes investment of both time or resources as well, and that's not easy when the payback isn't obvious, or it takes more than just a quarter to see what the benefits are.
Well, so, I'm curious your perspective as an academic, because you have your hands in a lot of this. You work with people all over the U.S. and I'd guess North America and maybe even the world, as far as I know. But, is the technology, what is like the mix of it being pushed by academia versus industry? Because, you see players that come out and they promise, we can give you a complete census at the individual tree level, and then they of course cannot. But then you have the academics going like, yeah, we're not there yet, and so it's a little bit more caution on the academic side versus like, yeah, we can definitely do this thing that we can't do. So what do what's your perspective on that?
Well, I think that's where we need combined spaces like these cooperatives to have these open discussions. Yeah, I think there's always going to be this weird dynamic between academics, users, and then the entrepreneurs. And when you have side or kind of separate conversations or conversations in silos, it's easy for things like a tree-based LiDAR derived inventory or some fancy new backpack LiDAR system that'll measure every attribute on every tree. It's easy to get wowed by these visions and these striking images, but I think also academics probably undersell or were kind of always the critics in the room. So I think having open venues is important, because I agree. Entrepreneurs are going to push new products. Obviously, landowners or users of this technologies have real issues, and it costs money to put people out in the forest. And so there's always that cost basis issue. But I think, to me, one of the things I'd like to champion is this idea of having a common area that we all work on, where you have the same information. Maybe every tree has been mapped. You have 50 calibration plots. You collect at LiDAR with 15 pulses per square meter. So then you can really do an apples to apples comparison, and really put technologies up against each other. To me, we haven't done that, and we haven't done it in a very transparent manner. So when vendors approach me asking for our technology or our algorithms or our solutions, that's the first thing I push for. Let's do a side-by-side comparison. And I would say 98% of the time I get no follow-up on that. So I think you're right that there's a lot of technologies out there, but they're not 100% vetted or been run through the paces. And probably as academics, we're always looking for that 1% incremental improvement, and are reluctant to share until we've got it perfect. So
Yeah.
I'd like to see a more open forum where these things are kind of vetted and put on a side-by-side basis.
So in your mind, what would that open forum look
I mean, as you may know, a large thing that I've been trying to champion is taking our regional cooperatives and making them at a national scale, bringing everybody together to work on common issues. So to me, that's an interesting area where now we could go target additional vendors or people like the carbon protocol people that haven't historically been part of these regional cooperatives, And you could have an open forum where projects are prioritized and funded by the membership itself, just taking that regional model and doing the same thing that we've talked about with these menstruations meetings, just combining efforts and leveraging strength and capacity across regions. So to me, it's as simple as getting everybody to sit at the same table and discuss the priorities. And then I think infrastructural, developing the infrastructure, though we can pick an area in the Southeast, we can pick an area in the Pacific Northwest, pick an area in the Northeast where we share the data and we know we have a good understanding of what's there and the history of it, so that you can do the side-by-side comparisons. It's really just a matter of getting people to talk to each other and identify some common areas that we could share data, in my perspective. But yeah, a lot easier said than actually done in reality. So that's what I'll keep working towards. But I'll tell you, it's hard because people don't want to think outside their regions. People are comfortable with their current cooperatives. Vendors don't often want to show their kind of secret sauce. So it's I get it. But I think we do a larger disservice, just like we were talking about with LiDAR. I mean, there was, what was that, early 2000s, 2003, 2004, you had companies promising to map species, individual trees, and they were around. They sold a lot of companies that, and it didn't quite pan out, like you said, and I think there was a bad taste. And then 5-6 years passed, and the cycle repeated with a new vendor. So somehow we got to minimize the kind of the wave, the ups and downs that we see, and kind of provide a more consistent.
I can see the frustration too. Probably not working for a company at that point, but I still hear about those days when kind of remotely sense inventory was promised and it could never be delivered. And even now, like I've been working in consulting for 4 years, and I get all the time like vendors like saying like, hey, like this is what we can do, and they can never do it. And they go, oh look, it works great in clonal eucalyptus. But well, it better work great in clonal eucalyptus. It's the same tree. But it doesn't work in a lovelly pine stand in East Texas that has Yopon taller than a pine tree. So it's and at the same time, because the product is overpromised and underdelivered so consistently, and then you have things like happened this year where one vendor just completely pulled out of the market, and then companies are left scrambling. How do I do my forest inventory this year? As a provider of like forest inventory for the Southeast, we got so many asks for, can you help us get our inventory this year? And it was just too much. It completely overwhelmed the market. So that kind of thing really puts a bad taste in your mouth whenever the next one comes along, right? You're going, yeah, we've done this 5 times and it didn't work. Why are we going to keep doing it?
I agree, and that's the problem of being dependent on things, and that's I think that's the beauty or the challenge of universities. I mean, we got staying power, and I think kind of fostering those relationships to do the vetting and the analysis, I think is so important, so that you don't have this sudden loss of technology or a vendor to kind of create these waves. So yeah, I think that's something I've really happy to see is the evolution of the sector. I think for a while there was a lot about proprietary and not sharing and not being collaborative, but I don't think that does anyone any justice. Yeah, so I prefer open source, collaborative, and shared, and hopefully I think this newer generation is more of that mindset, and I think the sector is responding accordingly to some degree.
I think we've kind of, well, I still put myself in the newer generation, and they're going to put me in a place that I'm not, at least from my generation, we've kind of grown up with open source. Like this has been a thing in our lives from the beginning. So at least I wouldn't say from the beginning, maybe the beginning of our professional careers. So having that mindset and being a little bit more open, will, as you said, it will help things move along because of the collaborative effort. I remember it was 2016 or 2018 at Virginia Tech, the conference that we had there. You were moderating, and I was giving a presentation, and I went way overboard, and you didn't cut me off, so I appreciate that. But after that presentation, I had a retired biometrician from a company that I will not name come and tell me, like, I was doing this work in the late 70s and found the same thing you did. He's like, yeah, but you guys won't publish, so we don't know that.
I agree. That's the problem is the amount of time and effort it takes to repeat these things. It could just be easily lessons learned and we move on and everyone benefits. I mean, it's not exactly rocket science to grow trees, but it takes a long time and an investment of energy to understand and model these phenomena. So why reinvent the wheel? I never got it. Yeah, I agree. I feel like I was raised in a pretty open-minded, cross-disciplinary, collaborative nature, and that's kind of the philosophy that I've kind of brought to how I approach things.
Well, and it's done you well. I was looking at your list of co-authors on Google Scholar, and you basically worked with everybody but me. So it's really impressive. It showed you're approaching 7,500 citations. So I'm curious, is there a plan when you hit 10,000?
No, I never started out that way. I mean,
Yeah.
It's just maybe my nature. I mean, I still feel like the undergrad kid at Ohio State trying to publish my senior honors thesis, and it just kind of grew from there. It's what you do. So, I mean, I would also say the best thing I've done, and I feel fortunate I did, was write a book. I mean, that you get a chance to sit down, think about, and reflect on all the things that have happened. And that came out of like a personal frustration of mine that biometrics wasn't widely celebrated, as a lot of these people just thought these models were just developed from a bunch of ad hoc fitted regression models. But in reality, a lot of thought and effort goes into this, and it's much harder to do than having 80 parameters like a mechanistic model. So trying to distill these into first principles and develop tools that can actually be used is much more difficult than publishing a few academic papers. So yeah, no, I'm proud of my collaborations. I maintain a really open mind and yeah, it's just a blessing because I get to work with so many different people. And I guess if you go by metrics, that it's been a productive career. But for me, it's the satisfying of generating new knowledge and seeing that knowledge actually implemented. Which yeah, we can point to some really big examples of that, and that's what makes me motivated to keep going.
Well, and it's great to hear you as an academic having that mindset that that's what it's about, and not about the numbers on the page. Although I know while you're working on tenure, those numbers really matter, which was a big turnoff to me of why you would want to become a professor. Having to show that you can get high impact journal papers if you're not indeed interested in work that would, for example, go to Nature or Science. I have always been interested in the applied biometrics world. Like for me, and that's why I do so well where I'm at, is because I can take the things, the papers that you all produce and put them into practice, and actually, decide if this is indeed useful or not. We don't change an equation for a 1% gain at all because it causes too many problems elsewhere in the value chain. But I, and well, not just an academic with a successful career, but you're also, since 2018, the director of the Center of Advanced Forestry Systems, CAFS.
Yep.
Yeah, it's been doing that. You took over in phase 3?
That's right. Yeah. So yeah.
You are basically leading one of the largest, I would say, quantitative forestry groups in the world. So how do you think about that and that's impact on the regions? Like, do you think eventually the regions should move into undercalves, or did you have something else in mind?
No, it's exactly like we were talking about. CAVS is a national consortium that it doesn't duplicate or it doesn't replace the regional cooperatives. I think there's always going to be room for regional issues like we were talking about. There's going to be southern pine beetle outbreaks and there's going to be spruce bloodworm outbreaks. And how you address those are very different issues. So I think there's a place for that regional knowledge and applied solutions. For me, CAVS is a vehicle for highlighting the great work that we do across these regions, but also leveraging the synergies and strengths that each of our institutions and those cooperatives have themselves. And just like we're talking about, bringing people to the table, having open conversations about what's a priority, what isn't a priority, and then finding ways to solve them. That's 90% of the effort is just getting people to share that information. And I think CAVS has been a huge success, not only in terms of the funding generated, the students support it, and the research that's been conducted, but the fact that you have cooperatives talking to each other. Each of these cooperatives has unique data, unique memberships, unique strengths, and one of the things I'm proud of is you suddenly have a Western cooperative working with a Southern cooperative to take a Western concept and apply it to Southern pine plantations. So again, it's how these breakthroughs happen. It's easy to get in our own mindset, our own bubbles. So getting new perspectives, and it didn't cost the Southern cooperative anything. They already had the data, and it's just a matter of sharing and collaborating. So I'm excited about CAVS. I took it on. It's not been the easiest endeavor. As you know, there's a lot of sensitivities about data sharing, about collaboration. Um, but if you can do it and create the culture that sees the benefits of that, I think that again, that's really where how things advance and progress. And I think it's important in this age of climate change and carbon. We don't have the chance to just sit on the sidelines and see how things unfold.
Well, I'm curious. You did 1 year as a research forester at Weyerhaeuser, and then went to Maine, and you've been in Maine ever since. So, was it always the plan to get into academia, or was it just like a year of research in industry and you're done?
Well, 2008 was a difficult year to be in industry. It was the
Right.
housing crisis, and Weyerhaeuser itself was going through a transition as it tried to figure out whether it was going to be a REIT or not. So those were challenging times, and um, you're young. Uh, you want to have a career. I'm not like this current generation. I want to have eight or 10 different jobs. I like stability. I like it takes a lot to pack up your bags and move across the country. So no, my plan wasn't my plan was never to go get a PhD, and my plan was never to go and become a professor. But again, just like we're talking about with these collaborations, keeping open minds, letting the winds kind of show where the opportunities may lie, and taking opportunities that exist. So yeah, and this is the longest I've ever been somewhere. I don't see myself leaving. I'm excited about the things we're doing here, and I enjoyed my time in industry. It's as you were talking about, um, working on applied issues, not having to go fight for every dollar that's going to fund your research program, being able to take ideas and actually see them from kind of generation to actual outcomes. I mean that and the pace of how change happens in industry is so much different than academia. So no, I would those opportunities are rare, and so I try to blend that now by working directly with industry members and cooperatives to see this thing happen. So yeah, I mean academics though I think is an interesting career. I agree, 10 years, this thing that's held over people. Peer-reviewed publishing is not a glamorous activity that I like the highlight of our profession, but I think the chance to interact with students, to see the generations change over time, to be part of innovation, to help kind of promote translation of science into activity, those are really beneficial to me, and I'm glad I got this opportunity to work as an academic.
Yeah, my wife is a professor, so she's an academic. So I, at least keep some foot in that world, even though not directly, but indirectly. But I still see the things that she's going through for tenure, and I'm going, man, I'm so glad I don't have to do that. Like, I've got different stresses. We have similar stress levels. They're different, but I don't go at the end of the day like, am I going to get to keep my job next year or not? Like, as long as I'm doing my job well, I'm going to keep it. And it's not a lot of, external things that affect that. So, well, and we're definitely, you know, happy that we have, at least in our field, the academics that we do have, like you, and I'm thinking Corey Green at Virginia Tech, Bronson in Georgia. Like, we have a lot of well-placed individuals who have that collaborative mindset, who want to work across the board on, these kind of problems. So it's very interesting, and I think maybe the previous generation might have had a similar experience. I don't know. When you, at least in the Southeast, when you talk to people, it's like Georgia, Georgia, Georgia. John Paul calls it the center of the world. But outside of that, for me, it seems like we have more people trying to work together, and so that's great. And it's good.
Yeah,
It's good to
yeah,
see that, because you don't get that kind of academic inbreeding that we're just constantly reproducing the same thing.
I agree. And it's a competitive world out there for universities too. So this is a challenging time for higher education, and the center of excellence. I do think it shifts based on, as we were talking about, the technology changes, the priorities change, and who's doing what matters. And so yeah, I think it's important to having those collaborative networks, and the benefits of a relatively small field like forestry is that you can work through these partnerships and address things head on. It's just hard though when we're all competing for a limited piece of the pie, and I think that's, if we work together, I think we could get a larger portion of the pie together. But convincing people that that's the vision, and having a shared philosophy to do that is much harder to do.
Yeah, I think about it, and I use this analogy, like, governments, like federal, state, local government, that, if you need something done locally, the local government is much more well equipped to do that. You don't write your state senator and say, like, we got to get these roads fixed. Similarly, of the co-ops and academic institutions, it's easy for me to call Corey Green and say, hey, I need this data to do this model. But if you have kind of a more, larger national or international cooperative, that could be more complicated to do, right? Because it's not as narrowly focused as a small regional club.
Yeah, but if you got the regional players that are part of it, then it's actually easier, because
Yep.
you've got a single point of contact who can engage a larger network. So I think it goes both ways. Yeah, I don't want to supplement the regional or displace the regional cooperatives. I think they have a time and a place, but
Yeah.
I think creating a network and a consortium of players just elevates the work that each of us is doing, and
Yeah.
highlights the collective importance of the overall effort, in my mind. But again, that's changing a culture, and it's changing mentality and perceptions as well, which is hard.
Well, and then definitely we're seeing, changes in mentality amongst the industry and consulting groups because of newer, younger people coming in and replacing older people. John Paul is a great example. We now have Christian Montez there at Rainier instead of John Paul, and before Christian was Nate Osborne, and they're doing things completely different than John Paul would do, and he might not agree with what they're doing, but they're doing things different and bringing new and interesting things into industry, and it's great to see that. I could see why having a larger group would be beneficial also. I think you would have a hard time, for some of these places to let go of their stranglehold. But I think it also might eventually just be forced. I mean, the fact is that it's not cheap to be a member of a co-op, and the money just keeps going up. And if you're members of 2 or 3 or 4, it's going to be the another analogy is the streaming services. Now you got Netflix and HBO and Disney Plus and whatever. Like eventually we're going to get back to the satellite system where you pay for one service and get everything, right? So is that going to be how it's going to be with the co-ops, that we just want to pay for one thing to get all our needs? It's possible, right?
That's my bet. I think that's the future we're headed towards, and better to adopt it now and not create these abrupt changes like we were talking about before, and transition to a new model that's going to keep everyone, to me, given the issues that we've been talking about, carbon, health, climate change, those are national, and we should be working together to address them and highlight the importance of the sector rather than me going to my center and someone else in the South going to their center to kind of fund separate things. It'd be better to do this jointly. I mean, we saw the same thing in the sector, right? And that led to the death of some of these regional cooperatives is the consolidation that happened within the sector itself. So I think the same thing happens with these cooperatives as well. So to me personally, I don't want to lose what we've been doing here. So I'd rather adopt to a new model and make that viable before my reality or the kind of the sand shift on me. And I'm forced to make a decision.
Yeah, the times they are changing for sure.
And they always will. And and I think that's what we just got to adopt to them and be responsive to the needs. And
well, yeah, it's interesting to say that because we in the face of like changing climate and changing markets, like we're talking about adaptability, and we ourselves also need to be adaptable.
And that's what academics is not good at. It's just like we were talking about with forests. They have long time horizons. Universities have been around for hundreds of years, and we're still applying the same models of how we do instruction and how we even evaluate professors. So I think we've just got to get to the times and find better approaches and strategies for doing that. And I think the same is true for how we do research and development. Mm-hmm. It's just we've got to pick our priorities and make strategic investments rather than kind of throwing limited funding around and trying to pop up things that might not be, that are more relics of history than anything else.
Yeah. So we've kind of talked, I mean, we've mostly been focusing kind of nationally, or at least in the North American field, but what about cross collaboration with the international folks? I mean, I'm thinking of people in Europe, the people in Asia, the people in Australia. Like there's so many people doing interesting and cool things, but outside of the UFRO, there doesn't really seem to be a good organization for that. And people in my field, like in my world, are not going to go to UFRO, right? We're not members. We're not going to go to that sort of thing. But, I think of like Scandinavia, the amazing work that they're doing there with LiDAR and remotely sensed inventory, and God, putting sensors on everything, and to be able to take some of that and use it in our world would be great. But there's not really a good connection between this. There maybe in the universities, but not outside of it.
No, but that's been a bold thing that here in Maine that we've tried to champion a MOU with Finland, so a Maine-Finland MOU that's led to a lot of conversations. I would say not a lot of outcomes yet, but again, just getting people to break barriers and work across boundaries, I think is really the first step of any collaborative effort. But I fully agree. We have a lot to learn from other countries, and I always argue that these countries make strategic reinvestment back into research, and that's something the U.S. does a horrible job of, and that's probably one of the reasons that we're not as competitively advantageous as other areas. So and that's a tough sell because margins are thin and companies have their own priorities. But again, if I mean, we look at the Forest Service as an example, just to look at the number of Forest Service scientists since the 70s, it's been in almost an exponential decline. And to me, that's a loss. That's a tremendous loss of knowledge and capacity that never gets replaced. So it's easy to go in one direction. It's easier to kind of reduce and reallocate than it is to rebuild. So to me, we've got to think about where we want to be and find strategies for building that next framework.
Yeah, it's interesting talking with Kwong Kao on an episode of the podcast, and he said that, you know, we've kind of hit the upper asymptote on modeling capabilities. I don't know necessarily that I agree with that, but modeling biological systems with like differential equations, those things maybe, but um, with the advances in technology, machine learning, artificial intelligence, I think there's just so much left to pursue. But in their day, in Kwong Kao's day, that generation, John Paul's day, there was still a lot of, for me, like some of the easier things to check the boxes on and get those things published. But today it seems a little bit more complicated to really pioneer something new. And even whenever you see things in the literature with machine learning or artificial intelligence, you're going, okay, that's great. Did you do anything new? Do you know why that works? Like, can it be extrapolated? Probably not. Um, I'm curious though, as an academic, what do you think, going forward in the future, where are we going to go as a science? What is it that's going to be the pioneering research that's going to push the industry, push the technology, etc.?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm a huge fan and user of AI, so to me that's where we got to be thinking is rather than fight it, work with it. So how do we automate many of the things that we're doing, and that's some of the research I'm most proud of here at the university is taking remote sensing. Maine is a really difficult place to do remote sensing. We got clouds, we got snow, we got mixed forest. So if we can do it here, we can do it elsewhere. And so I think we've developed tools and technologies to allow us to do this at large scales as well. It's easy to kind of take a 10, 20 acre postage stamp and make some fancy pictures with it, but it's much harder to scale things at very large scales. So that's and then not only to go there, but also to automate the workflows and address the big data challenges, so that it's not some person on a computer trying to click through images or stitch things together. You find smart ways of doing things, and I'm excited about this new future. I think there's a lot of different potential applications. I do worry a lot, like what you're talking about, is we take these fancy algorithms and we kind of talk about them being the shiny new thing, but we don't compare it to our old ways of doing things and doing the benchmarking that we talked about earlier. To me, yeah, non-parametric or machine learning methods are all the rage, and they got some advantages, but they got serious disadvantages, like you're talking about with the extrapolation, and you also can't guarantee biological realism, right? You can get very flexible curves that do all kinds of crazy things. So I think recognizing pros and cons of things, and again, having a common data set to do an apples to apples assessment, I think is huge. So, for example, right now we're running different models on the same data set and making comparisons. And I'll say there's like a threefold difference between the lowest model and the highest model. And if you do that over 17 million acres, you get dramatically different results. So I think really simple things of this kind of knowledge synthesis and co-production, I think is really the future. And the integration of this technology, like you were saying, sensors, remote sensing, UAVs. Now the issue is not generating data; it's making sense of that data and finding useful tidbits of information that can help individuals like yourself make better decisions or automate some of the processes that might be more manual or field based at the moment.
Well, Aaron, I appreciate your insights and I appreciate the conversation today. I think we're very fortunate to have someone like you in the position that you are, helping lead things, helping lead research. And so thank you for that. And again, thank you for coming on today.
Yeah, thanks, Mickey, for organizing this. It's an honor to join a pretty distinguished group of folks. Again, like I said, a pretty humble guy, and I've had the fortunate of crossing paths with a lot of colorful characters in our profession. And again, I'd welcome your listeners or anyone else to reach out to me and chat or collaborate or brainstorm, because I don't have all the answers, but I do have a good network of people that we can lean on and try to get things accomplished together. So thank you, Mickey, and hopefully this is start of many more conversations going forward.
Yeah, it sounds great. And we can't wait to see you in Vermont in November.
Yeah, November 3rd to 5th. So yeah,
3rd to
people
5th.
should be able to find it on mensurationist.com, but hopefully people can join us in northern Vermont and enjoy the Von Trapp Lodge. It should be a great event, and it's a great time of year to be in New England. So
well, yeah, we're definitely excited, and I'll put a link to the Mensurationist group and to your website on LinkedIn whenever I post it.
That's great. Thank you, Mickey. Just getting the word out and making sure people feel welcome, I think, is a huge part of this as well. So yeah, even if someone has some crazy idea they want to present, or just even a 5-minute flash talk, I think we welcome everyone to kind of talk about where they are and challenges or solutions that they might have. So thanks for helping promote it.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks, everybody. Until next time. Bye.
All right. Thank you.